Let's talk about an archaeological and architectural record that will never be broken and try to figure out which building has that distinction. The tallest building in the world for the longest period of time. And no, of course, it's not this building here. This is the tallest building in the world at this moment, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, and it has held that record since it was constructed in 2010. Having held the record of tallest building in the world for about 15 years, it's got a ways to go if it wants to compete with the contenders for tallest building in the world for the longest amount of time. In fact, its current reign amounts to 0.004 of a percentage point of the actual record. In terms of modern skyscrapers, the champ, in case you're curious, is the Empire State Building, because it held on for 66 years, so not bad. That's almost 0.02 of a percentage point of the overall record, so better than the last building, but yeah, we clearly have to go to ancient times, because people have been building tall buildings for a really long time, like ziggurats in Mesopotamia. And we can even take those and figure out how tall they would have been before they started degrading. Then there are some things that don't exist anymore at all, but we can still say around how tall they were and for how, around how long they stood, like the Colossus of Rhodes. But as you could have guessed, it is going to have to be an ancient building that had a chance to stand for a really long time before being topped by something else. What'll surprise you, I think, is the controversy about the winner. And I don't think it's a controversy as in a question that's out there. It's a question that I'm asking. Although I can't imagine I'm the first. Regardless, when you ask the internet or whatever the question, what building was the tallest in the world for the longest amount of time, you definitely get a consistent answer. No surprise to most of you, that answer is the Great Pyramid at Giza. Let's see what it's got in terms of making its case, and then deal with the dark horse contender that I'm thinking almost none of you have heard of. Or if you have, certainly aren't thinking of. So first, let's talk about the Great Pyramid at Giza. Here is where within Egypt it's located, by the way. And it's big. I'm not sure if you knew that. Really big. When first built, it was 481 feet tall. That's 146.5 meters. And that's the equivalent of roughly a 43-story building today. Very impressive when you consider that this was made in about 2600 BC. That was about 4,600 years ago. So again, really incredible. It's amazing what you can do when you have brilliant architecture, brilliant design, and a never-ending workforce that has no choice but to work on this project for you. And anyway, I think everybody probably knows when this was built, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world. No surprise there. I mean, again, 43 stories tall, that's still considered a tall skyscraper today. Although not as tall as the super skyscrapers that at one time or another were the tallest building in the world that we showed on the infograph earlier. But now let's get down to brass tacks as far as this video is concerned. For how long was this the tallest building in the world? Any guesses? Roughly 3,800 years. And originally, that is what I was going to make a video on. Like, hey guys, did you know the Great Pyramid of Giza has a record that will probably never, ever be broken? Because in modernity, the newest, tallest building in the world loses its spot, within just a few decades. And furthermore, none of these buildings here are going to last for thousands of years. Like, even if all the other contenders just collapsed and one of these was left standing right now, I don't think it'll be here 4,000 years from now. And even if it is, something new would get constructed before that would be even taller. Related aside, as long as we're learning so much here, what is the building that did finally top the Great Pyramid? This one. You're looking at the Lincoln Cathedral in England. It had a spire, it doesn't anymore, but it had one built in 1311, and that was what made it the new champ. But it got destroyed in a storm in the 16th century, 237 years later, in 1548. How tall was that spire? 160 meters, 520 feet. Really impressive because this was also well before the Industrial Revolution, right? But anyway, 237 years as champ can't be the dark horse candidate I was talking about earlier. So what could rival, and maybe even beat the Pyramid at Giza? Would you believe this? Believe it or not, this has been called the world's first skyscraper. It's also been described as one of the world's oldest towers, one of the earliest stone monuments of humanity, and one of the world's oldest stone buildings. We are looking at what is, in English, known as the Tower of Jericho. It's in Tel Es Sultan, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can see where it's located here on the map. And back to the tower, it's very unlike the Great Pyramid. It's not something that has been known ever since it was built. No one could see about it, think about it, talk about it, write about it, because it was underground. It had to be discovered in an archaeological excavation. The first one was in 1930, and it only found the site, not even the tower. It found these really ancient walls. Archaeologist John Gartsang, something like that, made the discovery and said, aha, I have found the site of the biblical story of the walls of Jericho. And the site is in Palestine. The walls seemed to be from around the right time, and they showed evidence that they had crumbled. So the bill seemed to be fit. But then, a couple decades later, in the early 50s, archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon came along and disproved this hypothesis. She showed that the site was uninhabited when the walls fell, and that it was all much, much older than previously understood. In fact, the spot could conceivably be called the world's oldest city. But that's up for debate. Is the overall site sophisticated enough that you would count it as a city versus, a settlement? Regardless, speaking of the really old things she found there, she discovered the tower. I know I've been teasing the age of this thing for a while, so how old is the Tower of Jericho? It was built somewhere around 8,000 BC. Research shows it was a massive, are you ready for this? 28 feet tall. Yes, the world's first skyscraper, what is often considered the first piece of monumental architecture as well, less than 30 feet tall. It was about 8.5 meters in height. But you have to realize the tower was built during the Neolithic period, a part called the Pre-Pottery Neolithic. One life usually looked something like this. And not like this. You know what I mean by life, the structures. And this took more work than you might think it did. It took an estimated 11,000 labor days to construct this. It had an interior staircase, as you can see in this visual from MedaneProject.com. Here's what it looks like for real, picture taken by the same website/project. And the 11,000 day thing, it gets misrepresented in some of the existing videos on the tower that I saw. Not that there's a lot of them. But for one thing, again, it's only an estimate. For another, those videos lead people to believe it actually took 11,000 days, like on the calendar, to construct this thing. But presumably, actually certainly, more than one person actually worked on this thing at a time. Back to the tower itself, it stood behind the walls that we mentioned earlier. And while it may have had some defensive intent, like, it could be a lookout tower, give you a great vantage point to see approaching threats, archaeologists at this point agree it probably was more of what you'd expect to a certain respect, something like Stonehenge, and too many other examples to name, a kind of astrological temple tied to the seasons and the heavens. So it's been postulated that the shadow from the nearby mountains would hit the tower before anything else in the town on sunset of the summer solstice. But now let's go back to our timeline. If this thing was built in 8,000 BC, somewhere around there, then it had a lot of time to rack up the years, centuries, millennia as the tallest structure. Could it really have held on to that for 3,800 years or more, establishing a record that the Great Pyramid at Giza would not beat? Maybe. And the obvious candidates for being taller than the Tower of Jericho and before the Great Pyramid would be the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. The problem is we can't say exactly when the first one was built or even when they started up with much precision. We got a 1,000-year swing here in the AI summation. If we do some simple math then, the only kind I'm capable of, then there's a chance that the Tower of Jericho, our dark horse candidate, is the actual winner. Let's say, people started building the kinds of things, taller things, monuments, monumental architecture in the cradle of civilization. And those, one of those things, probably not even one of the ones that survived, just something was made above 28 feet, but that didn't happen until, say, 4000 BC. Well, then the tower wins. It beats the Pyramid of Giza by a couple of centuries. 8,000 BC to 4,000 BC would be 4,000 years. But if that mysterious first proto-ziggurat or other tower or whatever was built at, say, 5,000 BC, then the Great Pyramid wins. I'm going to guess somebody must have built something, maybe several things, in fact, in different places, that were taller than 28 feet and well before 3,800 years had elapsed since the time of the construction of the Tower of Jericho. However, you could logically argue that so far there's no proof that something taller than 28 feet was constructed before the 3,800 time limit was hit. That unless you can find proof of that, the Tower of Jericho is the current champion, tallest building for the longest time. Wouldn't it be crazy if this magnificent structure here was beaten for that honor by a structure that was only 9 meters at the base, 7 at the top if you're curious, and less than 30 feet high? And that's it for the video. Believe me, there's a lot of structures I left out of this video. Yeah, believe it or not, because none of them reigned supreme for long enough. And the more you think about it, the more questions there are. I mean, what about, thatched roofs, that kind of structure? Wooden towers, and does the Tower of Jericho even count if it ended up eventually underground? Like, did it rain stop once it was subsumed by the earth? And then there's probably something I missed, or more than one thing. But if you have thoughts on any of that, let me know in the comments. Thank you.